In section 9.5, we use the quadratic formula to solve our quadratic equations. The first piece we talked about the quadratic formula was the discriminant. The discriminant was b squared minus 4 times a times c. We used that to help us determine the number of real solutions we had to the equation. After we figure out how many solutions we should have, then we use the quadratic formula to actually find the solutions. The entire quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Also remember, the discriminant is the same piece of the quadratic formula we find underneath that radical, aka the square root. Also, finding those solutions to our quadratic equation also tells us how many x-intercepts we have and tells us what the x-intercepts would be if we were to graph. So let's take a look at number 1. Let's find all the pieces we need. The first thing we want to find is the discriminant. And actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and pick out our a, our b, and our c. A, remember, is the coefficient of the squared term, or in other words, the number in front of x squared. Remember, we need the number. In this case, our a value is 1. We cannot put x squared into the quadratic formula, or put an x in there. Things will get really messy really fast. Our b is our coefficient of the x term, negative 6. And our c value is our constant, which means there's no variable attached to it. It's just a number. That's going to be positive 5. Now let's go ahead and find our discriminant. Our discriminant is b squared minus 4 times a times c. Keep in mind, anytime you square a number, the result is positive. If you want to put this expression in your calculator, you have to have the parentheses around the negative 6. Another little helpful piece, I would change this to plus a negative 4. Then I can see I'm multiplying negative 4 by 1, which would be negative 4. Negative 4 times 5 is negative 20. So the value of my discriminant turns out to be 16. Since the value of my discriminant is positive, that means we're going to have 2 solutions. Now, if you want to skip ahead, if we have 2 solutions, remember those solutions are just the x-intercepts of our graph. So if there's 2 real solutions, we also have 2 x-intercepts if we were to graph. So since I know I'm going to have 2 solutions, let's now use the quadratic formula to find those. X equals negative b, so here's the negative that's in the formula, then here's the negative for the 6, plus or minus the square root of 16. Remember, the discriminant is the same number that's underneath our square root in the formula, all divided by 2 times a. So x equals positive 6 plus or minus 4 divided by 2. So that means we have positive 6 plus 4 divided by 2, positive 6 minus 4 divided by 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So our solutions would be x equals 5 or x equals 1. In our second example, we can't dig in right away and find a, b, and c because our equation is not in standard form. Remember, standard form means we have our squared term, then our term to the first power, then our constant equal to 0. This equation does not equal 0. So to make that happen, we have to move the -1 from the right over to the left. Then I write my squared term first, then my term with x, then my 1 equals 0. Now I can pick out A, I can pick out B, I can pick out C. If I find my discriminant, that's b squared minus 4 times a times c. We end up with 4 plus -4 times 6 is -24 times 1. We get -24. Our discriminant turns out to be -20. So if our discriminant is negative, remember our discriminant we can't take the square root of a negative, and again the discriminant is the piece that's underneath that square root in our quadratic equation, our quadratic formula. So the number of real solutions would be 0. If we went to graph, we also wouldn't have any x-intercepts, and for solutions we would say no real solutions. Now, if you're not buying into that, we can go ahead and substitute into the whole quadratic formula. So -b plus or minus the square root, we can put the -20 in, if you'd like, and then 2 times our a, which is 6. If you put the square root of -20 in your calculator, you're going to get an error. It might say non-real answer, and it's exactly right. I cannot find a number so that when I square it, I get -20. So I cannot find the square root of a negative, so we say no real solutions. Make sure you don't put 0 as your solution, because x equals 0 can be a solution. So just be very careful. If there's no solutions, what we need to write.